Yo, what's good everyone? Welcome back to the channel. Week 3 of the NFL season is here, and today we're going to be taking a first look at this Sunday DraftKings main slate. What we'll do here today is go position by position, talk about some of the cash game plays and GPP plays that are sticking out to me here early on in the week, and then to wrap up the video, we'll put together a first look cash lineup and a first look GPP lineup. With that being said, let's dive into it here. Alright, so kicking things off here at the quarterback position, there's a lot to love about the quarterbacks on the main slate this week. We got all the big names: Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, Justin Herbert, so on and so forth. But there's 4 quarterbacks that I want to highlight here on today's first look video. Now on the cash side of things, and definitely would play them in tournaments as well, is Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts. Now Josh Allen here is expensive at $8,200, but he's dominated along with this Bills team in general throughout the first 2 weeks, putting up 32 plus DraftKings points in both of those games. No reason to think he can't get there against this Miami team, which very well could turn into a shootout based off of that offense that we saw from Miami last week. They definitely have the guys to make this an interesting game, but at 8.2K here, we need about 24.6 DraftKings points in order for him to meet 3x value in our cash lineups. He can definitely get there. Now, if I do want to save some money on the cash side of things, I like Jalen Hurts here as well. Dominated last night against the Minnesota Vikings, but was good in week 1 against the Detroit Lions as well, getting 24 DraftKings points. Again, no reason to think he can't do that here against Washington. Lamar Jackson, Mahomes, Herbert, Kyler, those guys are all great in tournaments as well. I wouldn't be opposed to playing them in cash, but I just really like Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts on the cash side of things, especially with that rushing upside that they bring. Obviously, a guy like Lamar brings that, but Bill Belichick will certainly be focusing in on that and trying to shut him down. Not that they necessarily will, but he'll be trying to. Now, on the tournament side of things, a quarterback that's sticking out to me here is Kirk Cousins. He was brutal last night, Monday Night Football against the Eagles. Primetime Kirk Cousins, I mean, that's kind of been the trend for him, right? But this is a great bounce-back spot for Minnesota at home against the Detroit Lions, which their offense has been pretty good throughout the first 2 weeks as well, and definitely some shootout potential between those two teams, and a divisional game at that. Now, like I said, a handful of other guys that could definitely be considered in tournaments. I think Joe Burrow is interesting, and I even think that Joe Flacco is interesting as well, playing Cincinnati. I might build a tournament lineup around him here today, but had a really good week 2, threw 4 touchdowns in that game, albeit 2 of them came right at the end of the game. Now, maybe they kind of carried that into week 3, and he's dirt cheap there at $5,300. And then one more quarterback that's sticking out to me here is Carson Wentz, who's been, let's say, very good from a fantasy perspective throughout the first 2 weeks. He does have 3 interceptions as well, but put up 30 plus DraftKings points in each of those first 2 games. Playing Philadelphia here, that can certainly put up points themselves, and kind of a little of a revenge narrative here as well with Carson Wentz. Now, that Philly defense did look very good against Minnesota last night, so I'm going to look into this one a little bit more, but Carson Wentz very well could be considered on the tournament side of things, and just based off of how he's played here in the first 2 weeks, he looks good for cash as well at $6,300, but I'm not entirely sure I'd go there. Now, moving over here to the running backs, and there's a lot to love about the running back position, and for what it's worth, there's a lot to love about this main slate in general this week. But a lot of these running backs are very closely priced here in week 3, and I don't know if I necessarily love that. You got Jonathan Taylor, who did get a $900 price reduction, and I do like that. Christian McCaffrey is right there as well. Probably the top 2 guys to consider in your cash lineup this week. Fine in tournament lineups as well. I do think Derrick Henry has a lot of GPP appeal this week at $8,100, as well as Delvin Cook here. And I know I just talked about Kirk Cousins, but Delvin Cook has just not been used enough throughout the first 2 games here for Minnesota, but he has been used enough in the passing game to where there could be a little correlation there with him and Kirk Cousins. But either way, I do think Delvin Cook is a good play against Detroit as well, that really hasn't been able to stop the run throughout the first 2 weeks. Austin Eckler is certainly interesting here, clearly a guy who gets involved in the passing game, but if Justin Herbert doesn't play this week, I'll probably downgrade that offense as a whole, albeit it is a good matchup against the Jags. Now, Joe Mixon is definitely interesting on the tournament side of things. Good matchup against the Jets. Aaron Jones played really well here in week 2. Got involved in the passing game and ran for 132 yards. But that matchup against Tampa is one that I do have concern with, so I'll probably look to avoid the Green Bay running backs this week, maybe focus a little bit more on the passing side of things. DeAndre Swift was limited last week, but still had a big run of 50 yards, finished with 17 DraftKings points. With him battling that ankle injury, I'll probably avoid that here in this matchup, especially at that price of $7,200. And the next guy that's sticking out to me here then is Lenny Fournette against Green Bay. $6,500 is too cheap in my opinion for a guy who's got 21 plus rushing attempts in each of his first 2 games and being used in the passing game as well. No Mike Evans this week. He was suspended after smashing Marshawn Lattimore after the whistle last week. So Lenny's going to be used in the passing game once again here this week. We don't know if Chris Godwin's going to play. Julio's got the knee injury. This could be another game where Lenny Fournette gets 25 plus touches in that game, and I do like it at that price of $6,500. Would consider him both in cash and tournament lineups. And then after Lenny there's a couple of guys that stick out to me here in the 5K range. I think James Conner is fine there for tournaments at $6,200. He did get banged up last week, but it doesn't sound too significant. James Robinson has been the lead back here for Jacksonville, but another matchup that I'm not really too thrilled about. David Montgomery here against Houston is certainly interesting, though. He's got 15 plus rushing attempts in each of the first 2 games here, been involved in the passing game as well. Look, Chicago has not been very good throughout the first 2 weeks, but played 2 pretty tough defenses at that with the 49ers and Green Bay Packers. This is going to be a much easier matchup at home against the Houston Texans. I'm hesitant to say I'm considering him in cash as of Tuesday morning, but tournaments for sure, especially at that price. And then Miles Sanders here is really interesting as well at $5,500. Clearly being more involved or used more in this offense. The concern is he's still playing around 50-60% of the offensive snaps. They're getting Boston Scott involved, Kenneth Gainwell, but I do like the opportunity that he has seen so far, and he scored a touchdown back in week 1. He didn't score a touchdown all of last year, so that's interesting here at $5,500. I'd hesitate to say cash again with him, but definitely a tournament consideration. Outside of him, not really in love with anybody below Miles Sanders. Cam Akers did get more involved last week. He had 15 rushing attempts in that game, but only had 44 rushing yards. Who knows what that offense is going to do as a whole going forward, because Darrell Henderson was the running back that scored the touchdown. Josh Jacobs might be interesting here at $5,400. Had some nice runs last week and got 19 rushing attempts. Breece Hall is getting a little more involved with the Jets, but I'm not super thrilled about the low 5K range here. As of Tuesday morning, again, the cutoff for me right now is Miles Sanders. Now, folks, if you could take a quick minute here to like this video and subscribe to the channel, I would greatly appreciate that. I got a lot of football content coming your way the rest of this NFL season, and we're just 3 weeks away from puck drop. For those of you who play NHL DFS and make some NHL bets, I'm a big hockey guy, got the Pure Hockey shirt on today, and I'll have plenty of content out for the NHL season as well. With that said, let's dive into the wide receivers here, and I probably don't need to say much above A.J. Brown. Look, Cooper Kupp, Justin Jefferson, Devontae Adams, Jamar Chase, Steph Diggs, Tyreek Hill, we know what they bring to the table week in and week out, and I'm not really concerned about any one of those matchups. Maybe Tyreek Hill here against Buffalo, who's just been lights out throughout the first 2 weeks, but I mean, Tyreek Hill can score against anybody. This dude is so fast. He's got the upside of 45 DraftKings points. Not a cash game play for me this week, but definitely a tournament consideration. A.J. Brown is definitely interesting against Washington as well. Looked pretty damn good in his new offense with the Eagles. But we have to talk about Amon-Ra St. Brown here of the Detroit Lions. 12 targets in back-to-back weeks, 8 plus catches in those games, 3 touchdowns already. This kid is legit and clearly the number 1 target in that Detroit offense. You know, again, that game between them and Minnesota could definitely turn into a shootout as well. I have a lot of interest in that game, but Amon-Ra St. Brown has to be considered in both cash and tournaments this week. Now below Amon-Ra, we got Michael Pittman Jr. there at $6,900. He did miss last week with a quad injury, but if he plays this week, I do like the matchup here against Kansas City, playing at home in a game they're likely trailing and playing from behind, needing to throw the ball a little bit more, and he was clearly the number one wide receiver and pass catcher in this offense back in week 1, saw 13 targets from Matt Ryan, and racked up 30 DraftKings points, just smashed his value at $5,500, and even though he's got a $1,400 price increase here, I'd still play him at that price. Jalen Waddle was great last week. Him and Tyreek Hill both just smashed with 40-plus DraftKings points, a tournament consideration there. Scrolling down here just a little bit, and next guy that sticks out to me then is Christian Kirk of the Jacksonville Jags. Now again, probably more of a tournament play here, considering the matchup against the Chargers, who have a lot of playmakers on the back end. But Kirk's been good in his first 2 weeks here with his new team. Trevor Lawrence definitely throwing the ball his way. 18 total targets so far, 2 touchdowns, and 20-plus DraftKings points in each of his first 2 games. Don't mind the price there, and don't mind him as a tournament play. I also think Michael Thomas is interesting here. He's got 8-plus targets in each of his first 2 games, scored a touchdown in each of those games as well. Again, probably more of a tournament play for me, but definitely has to be considered considering how he's played here in the first 2 weeks. After just missing all of last season, he looks pretty damn good. Now, Drake London is really interesting to me as well, and I don't mind the matchup here against Seattle. 19 targets throughout the first 2 weeks here, scored a touchdown last week. If Drake London's going to get 20-plus DraftKings points, we have to consider him in tournament lineups, and if the volume is going to continue to be there as well, might even have to consider him on the cash side of things. Rookie wide receiver looks pretty damn good throughout the first 2 weeks of the season. Now, Rashad Bateman's been very good in his first 2 games as well. Probably someone we need to be considering on the tournament side of things. Scored a long touchdown in both of those games. And Julio Jones. Mike Evans is out this week. I highly doubt Chris Godwin is going to play. If both of those guys miss, Julio should be the number 1 wide receiver in this Bucs offense. Again, he missed last week due to a knee injury, so we need to keep an eye on that. But if he does play, I think he sees at least 8 targets in this game. Might be someone we could consider in cash and for sure in our tournament lineups. And then another guy here down in the low 5K range, Curtis Samuel, is someone we have to talk about now. 20 targets throughout the first 2 weeks, scored a touchdown in both of those games, smashing his value in the 4K range, and he can clearly get to 15 DraftKings points as well, which we need in our cash lineups to meet 3x value. He'll definitely be a cash game consideration for me. Now we get into the 4K range here. There's definitely some tournament considerations here, but nothing that really popped out to me. There was one guy here in the 3K range, and I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but Rondale Moore, we saw Greg Dortch play really well out of the slot the last couple of weeks, and that should be the Rondale Moore role going forward. And at $3,600, I certainly don't mind that. I tend to look at the 3K players later on in the week to see if any value has popped up, but he's one that stuck out to me. I suspect he will play this week. Now, when I was going through the tight ends last night during the Monday night game, there were surprisingly a lot that caught my eye. Now, I don't need to convince you to play Travis Kelce or Mark Andrews. Darren Waller is fine at that price of $5,800. Those are the top 3 tight ends in the NFL right now, minus George Kittle, who's been banged up the first couple of weeks. Kyle Pitts here has not been very good his first 2 weeks. However, we just saw the numbers from Drake London. I have to imagine that Kyle Pitts is going to get one of those games sooner than later. We saw London, 19 targets throughout the first 2 games. Pitts here only has 10, so I imagine he's going to get an uptick in targets at some point. Playing Seattle this week, who doesn't have Jamal Adams for the rest of the season, could be an interesting tournament play there at $4,800. Dallas Goedert, Zach Ertz, I think both those guys are interesting as well. But Tyler Higbee, I kind of talked about him last week, and I didn't foresee him getting 9 targets, back-to-back weeks. But he did. And so we have to look at him at this price of $4,500 and a decent matchup here against Arizona, who has not been very good on the defensive side of the ball throughout the first 2 weeks. We could consider Higbee in both cash and tournaments here this week. TJ Hawkinson is an interesting tournament play to me at $4,200. Obviously not been very good throughout the first 2 weeks, but back-to-back weeks with 7 targets. Sooner or later he's going to find the end zone, and that's a really cheap price tag for a guy that usually floats around the lower 5K range. Scrolling down here into the 3K range now, and there's a handful of guys that I want to mention. I'll go through them pretty quickly because I'll condense this list later on in the week with my cash plays and tournament plays videos. But I'll hit these guys individually here one by one. And again, there's a lot that stuck out to me here early in the week. We got Hayden Hurst, who's played pretty well in the first 2 games with his new team in the Bengals. I love the volume that he's gotten so far. Tyler Conklin here, the Jets, another guy who's got decent volume throughout the first 2 weeks. Scroll down here a little bit more. We got Evan Ingram. Don't mind the way that he's been playing with his new team in the Jags. Like I said, guys, got a lot of guys here. Logan Thomas, he scored a touchdown last week, back-to-back weeks with 5+ targets, and he's coming off of that ACL injury. I think he's only going to get more involved going forward. Irv Gotti, or Irv Smith here of the Minnesota Vikings, had 8 targets last night in the Monday night game and dropped for sure touchdown, a long touchdown, 50+ yards. It literally hit him right in the hands. It was very frustrating to watch, but he still scored a touchdown in that game and very well could have had 2. Love that price there at $3,100. Think we can consider him in both cash and tournaments. And then Juwan Johnson here of the New Orleans Saints, decent volume in each of his first 2 games, 12 targets as well, and definitely a guy they look to in the red zone. So I listed a lot there on the tight end side of things. I will condense that list later in the week, but quite a bit of value sticking out to me here early on Tuesday. And then we got the defenses here. You guys know the deal at this position. I'm going to keep it short and sweet. I don't mind spending up for a defense in my tournament lineup. That's one way to get contrarian. But when it comes to my cash lineup, I'm going right to the 2K range here. And DraftKings got the pricing right on the defenses this week. It's kind of a gross slate in general at this position. But I don't mind the Panthers here playing against New Orleans. We saw last week Jameis is still very capable of turning the ball over. I don't mind the Houston Texans playing against Chicago either at $2,600. Texans haven't been horrible throughout the first 2 weeks here, putting up 6 and 7 DraftKings points. I did talk about David Montgomery earlier, but I'm not too concerned about that Chicago offense as a whole to where I wouldn't play the Texans defense. And then if you want to punt at the defensive position, I don't mind the Detroit Lions here. Their second overall pick, Aiden Hutchinson, did have 3 sacks last week and 5 as a unit. And Minnesota did not look very good last night, although I do expect them to play better at home here this week, so that would be the punt defense for me. But yeah, Houston and the Panthers are kind of the 2 defenses that are sticking out to me here early on in the week. Now, just want to take a quick minute to talk about one of the sponsors on this channel, Lucra. If you have not downloaded Lucra, it is completely free to get started. I'm actually going to throw a QR code up on the screen here right now. You can scan this with your phone. It's going to download the app, and once it does that, it's going to give you my referral code, which is GRIFF, GRIFF, and give you $25 in free play money. Now, you can use that free play money to compete against anybody, friends, family, or someone random, and if you win those contests, you'll actually see that free play money convert to real cash. So if you win enough of your contests with that free play money, you might legit never have to deposit a single dollar on Lucra. You can just build a bankroll from there. So again, I'll throw that QR code up on the screen one more time. You can scan this with your phone here. It'll download the app, include my referral code GRIFF, GRIFF, and give you that $25 in free play money. All right, folks, now let's bring this full circle here and put together a first look cash lineup and first look GPP lineup. We're going to start on the cash side of things. I mentioned earlier 2 quarterbacks that are sticking out to me, Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts. Initially, I'm going to take the price savings here with Jalen Hurts. I love Josh Allen. I want to get him in my cash lineup. But with everybody else that I want to get in my lineup, I'm not entirely sure that it is doable. But if you go there, I don't mind it at all. Now, Jonathan Taylor, Christian McCaffrey, we probably have to pick between one of those guys. I went CMC here earlier in the week. I played a lot better in week 2 against the Giants, more involved in the passing game, and we know the upside we get out of him. Don't mind the matchup against New Orleans either, who has not been very good at stopping the run throughout the first 2 weeks of the season. Leonard Fournette, think he's a little too cheap here at $6,500, and I'm actually going to go with Montgomery here as well initially at $5,900. So we got our 3 running backs there. It's something I love to do in my cash lineup, getting that solidified volume with your running backs. Now moving over here to the wide receivers, assuming that Michael Pittman Jr. does play here this week, I like him at $6,900, but I really like Amon-Ra as well. 12 targets in back-to-back weeks, 20-plus DraftKings points, the clear-cut number one wide receiver in a game that could definitely turn into a shootout against Minnesota. I also like the way that Curtis Samuel's played the first 2 weeks here as well. The volume is definitely there, found the end zone back-to-back weeks, and he didn't even need to do that in order to meet value, so I like him at $5,100. And I did cheat a little bit this week. I know I don't dip too much into the 3K range in these first look videos, but assuming that Rondale Moore does play, I like him at that price of $3,600. Now, Irv Gotti here at $3,100 for the Minnesota Vikings is a great tight end play in my opinion after seeing 8 targets just last night and dropping that long touchdown. So then we go to the bottom here, and we have the Detroit Lions, and that's the only defense that I could play. Yes, it's a little negative correlation there with Irv Smith, but we're punting at the defense, and I don't mind this as a first-look cash lineup. All right, now let's put together a first-look GPP or tournament lineup. I talked about Joe Flacco earlier, so let's roll with that idea. And what I'm going to be doing here, everyone, is actually targeting 3 games to kind of stack up. I'm going to do little mini stacks, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So we're going to start here with Joe Flacco on the quarterback side of things. And let's go ahead and stack him up with a wide receiver. Garrett Wilson was money last week, 30-plus DraftKings points. This kid is legit. If you want to go that route, I have no issue with that whatsoever. I'm going to go with Elijah Moore here, though. Where is he at? $55,000. Okay. Hasn't been utilized enough in the first 2 games, in my opinion, but there were a couple games last year where these two really connected, Flacco and Moore, so I don't mind him at that price and probably going to be able to get him at low ownership. I'm also going to go with that tight end and Tyler Conklin at $3,900. Love the volume, $3,800. Love the volume he's seen in his first 2 games. 16 targets, you kidding me? I'll take that in the 3K range. So there's a little stack there. I'm going to run it back with a Cincinnati player here as well. Let's go with Joe Mixon. All right, so basically what I'm doing there is saying Cincinnati might get out to an early lead, run the ball a lot in the second half with Joe Mixon, and then the Jets are playing catch-up like they have been the first 2 weeks, needing to throw the ball more. And you got a little double stack there with Joe Flacco, Elijah Moore, and Tyler Conklin. So that's the first game that we're targeting. Next game that we're going to target here then is that game between Minnesota and the Detroit Lions. So I'm going to go with Delvin Cook here, and then we're going to run it back with Amon-Ra on the Detroit side of things. A lot of shootout potential there. 2 studs on both sides of the ball. Love that little mini stack there. And then one more game that we're going to target here is the Eagles and the Commanders. And what we're going to do here is we're going to go with Samuel, who's looked really good. Put him in my cash lineup, but I don't mind him in tournaments either. And then on the flex side of things here, we are going to go with Miles Sanders. So that leaves us with $2,600 overall. There were a few defenses in that range that I didn't mind. Let's go with the Carolina Panthers defense there. As I mentioned earlier, Jameis is still very capable of turning the ball over. But let's go through this lineup one more time. Again, 3 different games that we're targeting. First, between the Cincinnati Bengals and Jets. We did a Jets stack there with Flacco, Elijah Moore, and Tyler Conklin, running it back with Joe Mixon. And then 2 little mini stacks here. First, between Minnesota and Detroit, we got Delvin Cook and Amon-Ra. And then that game between the Commanders and Philly, we got Curtis Samuel and Miles Sanders. And then again, we got the Panthers as a defense. So, Joe Flacco, you need to bank a lot on him throwing 3-4 plus touchdowns in this game. But should he be able to do that again? I kind of like the way that this lineup looks here in terms of the tournament side of things. All right, everyone, that is going to wrap up this video here for today. As always, thank you all for taking the time out of your day to watch the content here on this channel. If you could like this video and subscribe to the channel, I would greatly appreciate that. I got a lot of football content coming your way this week and for the remainder of the season, so stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, folks, let's have ourselves a great week. I'm out of here.